very lucky to have on the line with me at the moment Mr. Bob Daisley. Bob, thanks for taking the call.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice to talk to you, Mel.
Now, I must admit that the story that I'd been told and believed over the years about how you ended up overseas was actually incorrect.
What were you told?
Well, I was told that you and your band here were going to be going overseas, and you'd bought your ticket, and they chickened out, and you said, "Well, fuck it, I'll go anyway."
No, that's not that's not even close to the truth. No, I was in a band here called Carver's Jute. That's Kahvasjute, Carver's Jute, and we were doing quite well. I actually left the band in early '71. I think it was probably about February '71, and they went overseas. They went to London because we had a connection there. A guy called Clive Coulson, and he was working for Led Zeppelin at the time. So he was a very important friend for us. He'd actually been a singer in a band that I was in here in Australia with Dennis Wilson called Mecca. Clive Coulson was the singer. He was originally from London, grew up in New Zealand, came to Sydney, and he was our singer for a while. But then he got the call from Jimmy Page and Peter Grant to go back to work for Zeppelin because he'd already been working with them. And then he came out here, but they asked him back for the next tour and the next album. So it was after that Dennis Wilson and I formed Carver's Jute with two guys from a band here called Tamam Shud, and that was Danny Davidson and Tim Gaze. So Carver's Jute was formed. Anyway, I left the band. I had some personal things to deal with, and I won't go into that. But it's actually all in my book in great detail, the book called For Fact's Sake. And the whole thing's in detail in the book. My whole career, my whole life's in it. So it's a pretty comprehensive story in there. But anyway, they went to London, and I was still here. And probably only 3 or 4 weeks after they got there, they were trying to do something in London and trying to pick up a bass player there, and they phoned me and they said, "Look, we can't find anybody that suits the band like you do or plays like you do, and so it doesn't sound right. Would you consider coming over?" And I said, "Well, when would you want me there?" And they said, "ASAP." So I said, "Well, I've got nothing to lose, and I'm not doing anything here, and so I may as well at least give that a shot, So I sold my car and I sold my Marshall stack, and I got an air ticket together and had my vaccinations, and I was all set to go. And I think it was either the night before I was supposed to go or 2 nights before I was supposed to go. They phoned and said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's okay. We found someone." So, that was like, well, what do I do now? I go over there to nothing, or do I not go? And everybody around me, my mum, dad, sister, friends, and all that, they were very encouraging and very supportive. And they just said to me, you go, and you show them how it's done. So I did that. But I remember, I was only 21, and I remember going down the runway on the plane, watching them wave goodbye from the observation deck at Mascot Airport, and thinking to myself, God, what have I done?
Yeah, big move, eh?
Oh, yeah, going all the way to London by yourself to nothing,
At 21?
Yeah. But when I got there, I tried to hook up with Clive Coulson, and he was, because he was working with Zeppelin and that, and he wasn't at home. He was out of town, and so I ended up sleeping on a stranger's lounge. Somebody put me up for them for a couple of nights, and then on that was a Saturday morning I got there, and by Monday Clive was back, so I went round to his place, and he was really, really nice. I owe Clive a lot, because he said to me, "Look, you can stay here for as long as you need to, free of charge." That was great. So it was actually Clive. I did flat cleaning and house cleaning and all that, and then I got a job in a restaurant, and that went on for about sort of 6 or 7 months. I was starting to get a bit disheartened, because I've been going for auditions and trying to, get my foot in the door. and all of a sudden, one day when I was working in the restaurant, Clive came in. He had a bit of paper, and it had a name, Stan Webb, on it. And he said, "Here, this is the guitarist of a blues band called Chicken Shack." Now, Chicken Shack had chart success in England, and they were a blues band that was doing quite well. So I gave Stan Webb a call, and as soon as I mentioned Clive Coulson, that was a sort of a credible credential, if you know what I mean. So I was invited down for an audition. It didn't work out straight away, but there's actually quite a fascinating story about how I met up with Stan again and ended up in Chicken Shack. And I stayed with Stan until just over a year, I think it was, probably like 15 months or something.
Mm.
And the management that had Chicken Shack also had another band that was a big name band, that was Mungo Jerry.
Mm.
They'd had huge records, really big chart success, and they asked me to join Mungo Jerry. So I kind of begrudgingly did it. You know, I didn't really want to leave Stan because I liked the music more. It was like pure blues, and it was a fun time as well. But I did the Mungo Jerry thing for about 18 months or something, and it was an experience because we did a lot of television work. We had more chart success. We did loads of touring, and it was it was a great experience for me. It was really good. But I ended up leaving Mungo Jerry to go back to Stan Webb for another version of Chicken Shack. And this was in probably late '74. So I'd been in London for 3 years then, and the other guitarist in this lineup of Chicken Shack was a guy called Robbie Blunt.
Yeah.
And Robbie Blunt ended up as Robert Plant's guitarist when Zeppelin folded.
Yeah.
So, but that was a good lineup. We had a drummer called Bob Clouter, aptly named, and Stan Webb, myself, and Robbie Blunt, and we did a lot of shows with Deep Purple around Europe and that, because Chicken Shack was quite big in Europe as well.
Yeah.
And one of the shows I had a recording of.
Right.
It was early '75 in Germany, and I had it on tape in my archives for 40 years. Well, I've just got it released now.
Wow.
And it's come out. It's just called Stan Webb's Chicken Shack live in Germany '75. So. But the band's hot, we were playing really well, and we'd been playing together for a while as well. So the sort of communication between us was really, really good. Because in those days, you didn't just get up and play a song and play it from top to bottom. It was 3 or 4 minutes long. You used to we're talking sort of early to mid '70s, and bands used to sort of, play the structure of the song, but also jam within that structure, So you do improvisations and jamming and have fun with it. So there's plenty of that on that recording. And the show was probably about 90 minutes long, and I've got 78 minutes of it. The tape ran out, I think, halfway through the last song, but we didn't miss much. The meat and potatoes is about 99% of it is there. So
yeah,
it sounds really good. I'm quite proud of that recording.
Yeah. So where to after there?
After that, I formed a band with a guy called Ariel Bender, who had been in Mott the Hoople. His real name was Luther Grosvenor, and his stage name was Ariel Bender. He'd come out of Mott the Hoople.
Yeah.
And
say no more.
What's that?
Say no more.
Yeah. As Luther Grosvenor, he'd also been in a band called Spooky Tooth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were quite big in the sort of late '60s, early '70s, and we had a singer called Steve Ellis.
Yep.
Who'd been in a band called The Love Affair, and they had a huge hit with a song called Everlasting Love. Mm. And the other guitarist we had was Hugh Lloyd Langton, who'd come out of Hawkwind.
Yeah.
And the drummer was from a band called Lindisfarne in the north of England. They'd had a lot of chart success as well. So, it was a bit of a sort of put-together band of named people, because we'd all done something by then. That lasted we formed the band in '75.
Yep.
And then we did 2 albums, 2 tours of America, Canada, America, Europe, Scandinavia, all around England and that. So we did lots of touring, 2 albums, and on the second American tour, after we'd done the second album, I met up with an old mate of mine I'd played in Mungo Jerry with, a guy called Dick Middleton. Hmm. And he was a mate of Richie Blackmore's. Richie had just come out of Deep Purple not long before that, and and he'd formed a band called Rainbow. Well, when I looked Dick up in LA when I was there towards the end of the Widowmaker tour, and he actually said to me, he said, "Would you be interested in a gig with Rainbow with Richie Blackmore?" And I thought, well, that'd certainly be a step up the ladder. And to be honest, things weren't going that well with Widowmaker. I mean, there's lots of crazy stories in my book about Widowmaker and how nuts they could all be, But so I said, well, yeah, certainly I'd consider it. And I ended up going for the audition in LA with Richie Blackmore. Ronnie Dio was the singer. David Stone was the keyboard player, and Cozy Powell was the drummer. So that was a pretty hot situation to get yourself into. So it was certainly a step up the ladder, and it was going from doing small theatres and clubs and sort of reasonably sized venues with Widowmaker to doing the big arenas and all that with Rainbow. They were a pretty big band. So that was a big sort of learning curve as well, which was a great bit of experience.
Not a bad gig to get, though, eh?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I was reluctant at first. There's the whole story about me joining Rainbow in my book, where Ronnie Dio and Richie came down after I'd auditioned, and they went into an office to have a sort of bit of a chat and all that, and they came out and they said, well, the gig's yours if you want it, because they'd auditioned at something like 40 bass players, and they couldn't find anyone that either looked right, played right, and that they could get on with, But I think I had all the boxes ticked. So they said to me, the gig's yours if you want it. And I actually said, I'll think about it. Well, only because I had my band Widowmaker.
Okay.
And I'd heard that Richie could be a bit of a taskmaster and a bit of a sort of chew you up, spit you out sort of thing. And I thought, well, God, I have to be careful here. I don't want to end up with nothing, But as it turned out, there's another story in my book where the decision was really made for me. And I ended up in Rainbow soon after, and that was lots and lots of. We did one album which was Long Live Rock and Roll, and lots of touring with that band. It was a lot of hard work, but that lasted from. Well, I joined in about I think it was around about the time Elvis died, which was August '77. And that lasted through to the end of '78, probably about 18 months or something.
What's your best memory of your time with Rainbow?
Best memory? Well, I suppose that the very first gig that we did, which was in Stockholm in Sweden, I was, I was apprehensive. I was a bit nervous. There was certainly an element of anxiety, and I had put the work in, and I was serious about it, and I knew how particular Richie was. He was really, really sort of pedantic about music and about getting it right and being, everything had to be perfect, And after that first show, the dam had been broken, and it was like, okay, onward and upward from here. And after the show, Richie actually came over to me and he said, how pleased he was because I'd done my homework and it had all worked out very well. So, I mean, that was a nice feeling coming from somebody like that who was so well respected and such a great musician,
Yeah.
And the other memory I have of that was when the last show that I did with Widowmaker in LA was at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And Richie was waiting for me up in a club just up the road called the Rainbow Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
And when I walked in, he actually stood up and clapped because he'd been to the Widowmaker gig at the Whiskey, and he knew that I was about to join Rainbow, so he was really pleased. So when I walked in and he clapped, that meant something to me. That was a great feeling.
Yeah, I bet it did. What happened after Rainbow?
After Rainbow. Rainbow sort of ground to a halt because Richie wanted to get a new lineup and be more commercial. He wanted to be a bit more sort of radio friendly, if you like.
Yep.
Well, he did that. He kept Cozy Powell on drums, but he got rid of David Stone on keyboards, me on bass, and Ronnie on vocals, and he got a new band sort of thing. Except for after a little while, Cozy said, no, this is not for me, and he left. So Richie got another drummer then as well. So because it was going a bit sort of, well, I wouldn't call it poppy, but it was certainly away from the vein of the old Rainbow and the Deep Purple thing, and that, where it was heavier and more aggressive. So
yeah.
Richie had his chart success and his airplay radio success, but I think in some ways it was viewed as him selling out a little bit, But after that, you see, I was supposed to be forming a band with Ronnie Dio.
Yeah.
Because Ronnie, during the tour of America with Rainbow, Ronnie must have got wind of something about, the possibility of Richie getting a new lineup, because Ronnie actually said to me, if this folds, he said, would you be interested in getting a band together with me? And I said, well, if I'm not in this, certainly, because I like working with Ronnie and he was a great singer. So I said, yeah, for sure. So when it did happen, and Ronnie phoned me from the States, I was in London, and he said, well, it's happened. Do you fancy getting something together? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, well, I'll start looking for guitarists over here, and I'm talking to record companies and all that. So that's what was next on the agenda. But, a couple of months went by, and I'd talked to Ronnie on the phone, and he'd sort of said, oh, hang in there, we'll get this happening. And then all of a sudden, one day I bought one of the music papers. It was New Musical Express or Melody Maker or one of those. And on the front page it says Ronnie Dio joins Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, well, there you go. There's that out the window. I guess Ronnie and I aren't getting a band together after all. It would have been nice to be told, but anyway, I got a call from Sharon Arden, who's now Sharon Osbourne, but I got a call from Sharon saying that Ozzy was looking for musicians because he'd just been booted out of Black Sabbath. And she, it wasn't an offer to me at first. It was just sort of, do you know any good guitarists? Because Ozzy wants to put a band together. And he was in LA when he got fired from Sabbath. So
yeah.
But a few months later, I was in a club in London called the Music Machine. I think it was in Camden. And I specifically went there looking to see, what was about, because I was out of Rainbow looking for work. And I thought, if I go to this gig tonight, there was a band called Girl playing there that night. And I thought, well, I know they're on Jet Records, and Widowmaker had been on Jet Records. So I thought, if I go to that gig, there'll be Jet Records people there, and then I'll know. So at least there'll be, contacts there. Anyway, I did meet up with a guy called Arthur Sharp from the Jet Records office. And he said, oh, do you know Ozzy Osbourne? And I said, well, I've met him. And I said, I wouldn't say I really know him. He said, well, he's here tonight. He said, hang on. And he said, I'll go and get him. And so Ozzy and I started chatting. And Ozzy was back. He'd only just come back to England then. And he actually said to me, he said, I'm trying to put a band together here. He said, would you be interested? Because he knew that I'd just come out of Rainbow, and he'd just been fired from Black Sabbath. So, that was a good start.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, sure. So I got a call from the Jet Records office from David Arden. That was Sharon's brother, because Sharon was still in America.
Mm-hmm.
And David Arden from the London Jet Records office phoned, and he said, you fancy catching a train up to Stafford in the Midlands, and you're having a play with Ozzy, see how it goes. I said, yeah, sure. So they got me a train up, bought me a ticket, and at the station when I got there, Ozzy was there to meet me, took me back to his house, and he had a couple of other guys there, a drummer and a guitarist. So we had a bit of a play that afternoon, and these guys were nice enough guys, and they weren't bad players and all that, but it didn't knock me out. Ozzy sounded good, and Ozzy and I got on great, so when we had a break and I was in the kitchen with Ozzy, he said to me, so, what do you think? You interested? So I said, yeah, well, I would be interested if you want to get serious about it, because I said, to be honest, I don't think the other two guys are really world class. He said, oh, okay. He said, hang on a minute. He walked out, and because he had a rehearsal room as a sort of built onto his house, and I heard him go into the room. He said, it's all right, fellas, you can pack up and go over. It's not working out. he got rid of those guys just at the drop of a hat like that, just because I'd said, they weren't world class. So he phoned Arthur Sharp, the guy who introduced us at Jet Records, and said, "Oh, Bob and I get on like a house on fire. The fire brigade's just left." That's what he said. I still remember his words. I said, "Well, we'll have to start looking for drummers and guitarists in that now, if you want to put this together." He said, "Yeah," and that's when he said to me. He said, I met a guy in L.A. He said he was a great guitarist, and he's a guitar teacher at a school.
Mm.
I said, "Oh, well, who's that then?" He said, "Oh, it's a guy called Randy Rhoads." Well, that was the first I'd heard of Randy Rhoads. He was an unknown young guitarist. But when Ozzy said that he was a guitar teacher, I sort of had a thought of somebody in a cardigan and slippers and glasses and a pipe.
Yeah.
But he was we started looking. First of all, Ozzy had already met Randy in LA and given him the gig. But then Ozzy came back to England and he wanted to try to keep it as a UK-based band, so he didn't bring Randy over. But when we started looking round for guitarists, and a lot of people weren't really interested because Ozzy didn't have the best reputation in the world at that point, after being booted out of Black Sabbath for, being sort of non-productive and unprofessional and out of his head, so. But I just had a feeling that it was the right thing to do to get this thing together with Ozzy, and so I started phoning around guitarists that I knew, but a lot of people sort of weren't that interested. So eventually, Ozzy and I said to David Arden at the Jet Records office, "How about this young guy that Ozzy met in LA that's supposed to be a great player, Randy Rhoads?" Well, David didn't want to fly him over at first because he said, "Well, he's unknown and he's just a kid, So David finally agreed and got Randy over, and then Randy, Ozzy, and I had a meeting at Jet Records with David Arden, and then we caught a train up to Ozzy's and had our first play together, and it was just magic.
What was going through your mind when you did that for the first time with you and Ozzy and Randy together?
Not anything sort of out of the ordinary. I knew Randy was a good player, and we hit it off well musically, and the three of us, it sounded good. Ozzy had a mate there, a guy called Spencer, that was sort of sitting in on drums for us just to supply a beat. He wasn't sort of ever considered as drummer for the band or anything. He was just Ozzy's mate who could supply a beat, and he was an okay drummer, so the four of us were sort of having a little play. But I suppose the main thing that was going through my head was a sort of thought of relief that, yes, this could work, this is good, it's gelling already, it's good. Now we have to find a drummer, So it was Ozzy, Randy, and I started putting song ideas together and auditioning drummers at the same time.
Yeah.
Eventually we found Lee Kerslake was the last guy that we had to audition. Mm-hmm. We'd run out of people to audition, and Jet Records had actually Jet Records actually said to us, "If you don't find someone soon, you're going to have to go in the studio because we want a product, and you're going to have to go in the studio with a session player or something,
Yeah.
But we wanted to keep it as a band, so we didn't want session players or anything like that. So we were adamant that we would keep looking until we found the guy. But the last guy that we had to audition was Lee Kerslake. And as soon as he started playing, Randy and I looked at each other and thought, "Where the fuck have you been?" Because he was just right. He was perfect for the band. He just, he had the right sort of aggressiveness and the right sort of heaviness in his playing, and it just all gelled. Then we had finally a complete band.
Yeah. What sort of state was Ozzy in all of this after having been fired from Sabbath?
Yeah, well, he was still reeling from that sort of hurt. He was, because I remember he actually said to me, he said, because some days he was in bits, he'd get pissed and he'd lie in front of the fire and fall asleep and piss himself, it was like, a lot of the time he was together, and I was encouraging him greatly in those days to not drink during the day and to begin to look after himself a bit better. So, I mean, I used to go out jogging, and I finally got him to come out with me, and he used to come out jogging with me. And then he'd sort of like, some days he wouldn't drink, and that was a great thing. But, you know, I wanted to keep the fun element in it, and I didn't want it to be all sort of too serious, so we'd all have a drink at night. But, you know, that was fine. After you do a day's work, that's fine. You know, you're being productive. But some days he would start drinking in the morning because he was hurting from the, you know, the losing his first main band. He said to me, he said it to me, it's like going through a divorce. That's what he said to me. Mm. So anyway, we finally, you know, had the band together. We'd still have a drink and get a bit silly sometimes and that, but it was all coming together. It was, you know, musically coming together. It was coming together as a band. You know, the camaraderie was really being established, and then we finally had a name, and we called the band the Blizzard of Oz.
Because it was a band, wasn't it? It wasn't an Aussie solo project. It was a band.
It was not an Aussie solo project. An Aussie solo project was never even mentioned or considered. It was. I mean, that's an afterthought years later, where they've tried to rewrite history, and that's completely untrue. No, it wasn't a solo record, although the record company wanted to focus more on Ozzy, which we understood, because he was the voice of Black Sabbath and he'd just come out of Sabbath. So we said, well, that's fine if you want to say, you know, featuring the voice of Black Sabbath or featuring the voice of Ozzy Osbourne or whatever. But what they did was, when the artwork was done, and they didn't consult us, on the front cover of the album they've put Ozzy Osbourne in big letters, and underneath that, in smaller writing, the Blizzard of Oz. And that made it look like an Ozzy Osbourne record called The Blizzard of Oz.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Actually, it should have just had The Blizzard of Oz written on the front, and that's what we all agreed to.
Who wrote all the songs?
Well, at that point it was mostly... Well, no, Ozzy had a hand in it as well. I mean, the writing went like this. Randy did most of the sort of guitar riffs and that stuff. I put the music together with Randy and turned his riffs and things into songs. Ozzy sang the melodies over what we'd done musically, and then I wrote lyrics to Ozzy's melodies and phrasing. So we all had a hand in it. But at that stage, just for the first album, there was only one song that Lee had co-written, and that was No Zone Movies. But on the second album, Diary of a Madman, Lee had more of a hand in that then. Yeah. So we, after that first album, I think the first album came out in about September 1980.
Yep.
And we went on the road in the UK, and we played in Scotland, Wales, England, and the tour went on for about 6 weeks or so, and that was great. A good tour that was pulling the band together. And then about, I think it was February 81, we began recording Diary of a Madman. At end of 80 and into the beginning of 81, we were writing new material for Diary of a Madman. So by the time we got into the studio, the two albums, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, were about sort of, I don't know, 10 or 11 months apart. Because there was a rumour going around that we recorded both albums together, but we didn't. They were about a year apart, roughly.
Yeah, okay. That's another one of these Chinese whispers that... you know, I had heard back in the day. Yeah. That's what the word was around the place.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how that got started. Maybe because the first album, Blizzard of Oz, came out later in America. And while the band was on the road, then soon after that, Diary of a Madman was released. Maybe people just thought, oh, they must have recorded the two albums together for that to happen, you know. But Blizzard of Oz had already been out in England in September 1980.
Now, of course, Randy Rhoads is no longer with us. What's your best memory of working with him?
Just how easy it was to create with him. You know, he was... his ideas were always good. He was very, very... musically educated, because his mother owned a music school and he'd been playing since he was 5, and he had a great musical background, although he wasn't all sort of theory, you know, like musical theory. It was fun as well, you know, because he had all these influences of rock and blues and, you know, Hendrix and Blackmore and Zeppelin and all, you know, so it was all sort of in a big melting pot along with his classical style, because he was very, very interested in playing classical guitar.
Yeah.
And he was having a lot of sort of extra tuition on classical guitar from all sorts of teachers around the world. You know, when he came to London, he was looking up teachers there to find someone who to keep progressing with. You know.
Yeah.
So it was a lovely memory to to see how we used to do it was just sort of sit on a chair each, you know, opposite each other, and just sort of discuss. He'd come up with a riff, and I'd say, I've got something that goes with that, or let's do this with that, or let's change this bit, whatever. And it was all very, very sort of relaxed but creative, you know.
Yeah,